And a dramatic and unprecedented weekend in Venezuela has sent shockwaves well beyond the country's borders, following a major U.S. operation that upended the political landscape in the country. The fallout is already being felt in global markets, diplomatic circles, and among key allies, including Canada. As world leaders weigh the consequences and investors react to the uncertainty, questions are mounting about what this means not just for Venezuela, but for the stock market. To break down what this means, we're joined by Brendan Caldwell, director of Caldwell Securities Limited. Brendan, thank you so much for the time today.
Thank you. I'll push back just a little bit before we get into the questions. It's not entirely unprecedented. About 30 odd years ago, 35, Bush 1 did this to Manuel Noriega in Panama. So they have done it before, and it won't be the first time or the last probably America has gone on to regime change. But sorry, your questions.
Well, no, and as you've mentioned, we've seen this before. So let's start with what happened in Venezuela over the weekend and what economic impacts could we potentially see and what did we see in the past? As you've mentioned, it's happened before.
Well, so what we saw apparently was that the United States went in and forcibly extradited the president of Venezuela and his wife, which is a very bizarre thing. I guess they want the wife for leverage or something. I don't know, but they've been handcuffs and earmuffs and blindfolds. We've all seen the picture of the Venezuelan president on the USS aircraft carrier, and apparently they're in New York and being indicted there. So of drug charges and different things. So it's a big thing. I mean, the Noriega extraction was not nearly this neat. So kudos from a tactical perspective, but strategic, global, I think it raises quite a few doubts.
And how did the markets react to what happened?
They're up. It's as though they haven't really noticed or think this is vaguely positive. And it may be. I mean, Venezuela has been a failed state now for decades since its move towards socialist populism. It's just that at this time and in this climate, I don't want to go down too far down that road, but the market has not reacted negatively. Perhaps the market's thinking with America does, in fact, get oil flowing again because Venezuela used to produce about 8 million barrels of oil a day. One of the biggest oil producers in the world and has a tremendous gold reserve and lots of other resources as well. And all of that has ground to a halt as mining and energy production have not been reinvested in and have just deteriorated. So now they've gone from 8 million barrels a day down to 1 million. So if they can expand production again somehow, perhaps that makes for cheaper energy and makes it easier on the economy, perhaps.
Now, and before the new year, you and I actually talked about the surge that we saw in gold in 2025. What implications could gold face due to the conflict in Venezuela?
Well, I mean, gold is still going to be, I think, a real store of value. I say real as opposed to crypto, which, as we talked about, Bitcoin and the other so-called cryptocurrencies had been soaking up a lot of the money that wanted to bet against government-issued currency, fiat currency, so to speak. So if you wanted to bet against the US dollar, you could buy some Bitcoin. And for quite a few years, that has been proved correct. It's gone from in 2009 from a few $100s a coin to peaked out at about $120,000 a coin. But of course, it's pulled off considerably from there. But gold has had is having a bit of a resurgence here as more and more countries are looking for alternative reserves to either the US dollar or crypto. So they're going back to the oldest form of value storage there is, bar gold.
And what are the implications for Canada?
Of the Venezuelan, I think there's a few. From a purely economic perspective, Venezuela and Canada make similar types of oil, heavy oil. So what is known as the oil sands up in Alberta, Fort McMurray area, is a lot of heavy oil, which the U.S. has geared itself to process. And they've been, the U.S. is buying more of our oil, which is part of the reason I think that there's been a reluctance on the part of the U.S. and various activist groups to allow Canada to have a blue water export market for our heavy oil because it just comes in cheap to the U.S. Well, if Venezuela becomes another viable source of heavy crude for the United States, it may further reduce the price of Fort McMurray oil as a possibility. But again, I think it'll be a minute before that energy becomes on stream, assuming everything stabilizes in that country. And it's given the chaos over so many decades. I think that may be a minute. Politically, I think it makes I mean, Venezuela and has been almost tarred with, I won't say it's been tarred with the same brush as Canada. They haven't been bombing our ports recently, but it does make a point that I think Canada should be aware of, that the United States and President Trump in specific are prepared to actually follow through. Trump's been tarred with the brush of taco. Trump always chickens out. Well, apparently he hasn't chickened out in this particular case. And one of the reasons, allegedly, is that the Venezuelan president was seen dancing, mimicking, and making fun of President Trump's dance moves. And well, he can dish it out, President Trump can, from a verbal abuse perspective. He ain't so good on taking it. And he takes any slight very personally. We saw that with our previous prime minister, who spoke nicely to Trump in person and then trashed him behind his back. Unfortunately, the microphones were on. So I think it would behoove Canada to mean what we say and say what we mean, and for our leaders to be straightforward with Trump and not take sophomoric pleasure in making fun of him, because I don't think there's any upside to it other than a momentary smarmy, I don't know, pleasure, I suppose.
And what could this potentially mean for the world? I mean, I know it's still early and everything is still being figured out and discussed, but what could the potential implications be?
I have long thought that whatever I think is a bug in the world is actually somebody else's feature. To compare small things to great. In my hometown here in Toronto, everybody complains about the traffic. Don't politicians know what they're doing about the traffic? Well, of course they know what they're doing. It's intentional. What we think is a bug, bad traffic, is actually a feature for those that are planning traffic patterns, because they want fewer people to use cars. They want more people to use public transit. Whatever you feel on the issue, what I think is a bug is actually a feature. So for a bit, I'd been thinking the last few days, well, this is a terrible thing, because it normalizes a country acting in this kind of aggressive way, this very aggressive way, in its own sphere of influence. In the case of America, the North American, South American, Western Hemisphere. But then I'm thinking for a second, wait a second, what if this is what the president and America actually want, is to normalize this? What if they're really saying, in this world, there is America, Russia, and China, and within our respective spheres of influence, we should have some latitude to do what we would like. And when I saw the cameras around London years ago, in London, England, I thought 1984 was meant as a cautionary tale, not a how-to novel or a how-to manual. And so here we are. In 1984, there were three power blocks that controlled the whole world: East Asia, Eurasia, and Oceania, which was the one that the protagonist, Winston Smith, inhabits. And they were roughly correspond to the Western world being Oceania, East Asia being China, and Eurasia being the Russian bloc. And these three controlled the whole world. And that really does seem to be the message that we're being sent, that each of these power blocks has their own sphere of influence.
Well, Brendan, thank you so much for the time. As always, we appreciate it.
Thank you, Theresa. I hope the actual outcome is more optimistic than the one I'm painting. Happy New Year and a great 2026 to you.